it. Yeah, I sat.
I'd like to call to order the Wednesday, February 12th, 2025 Chesapeake Bay Wetland, or Chesapeake Bay Board, excuse me. It is the responsibility of this board to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries to the Chesapeake Bay. Roll call, Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Roadley?
Here.
Mr. Woolsey?
Here.
Mr. O'Brien?
Here.
Mr. May?
Here.
Ms. Bowie?
Here.
Mr. Woolsey is sitting in tonight for Mr. Waltrip, who is absent.
Thank you. The minutes, you've had an opportunity to review the minutes from the January 9th meeting. Do I have any changes or additions? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Motion to approve, Mr. Wilson?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
We'll enter the public comment period of our hearing tonight, or meeting. The public comment period offers a chance for community members to express their opinions. Topics discussed shall not be directly related to a specific public hearing item. To participate, speakers must provide their name and address for the record. Would anybody care to address the board during our public comment period? Seeing none, I will close the public comment period and move on to public hearings. The outline for tonight's public hearings will be a staff presentation followed by any questions or clarifications from the board. Then the public hearing will be opened. At that time, anybody wishing to speak may do so once called upon by the chair. All public speakers must state their name and address for the record. Presentations before the board are subject to time limits. After everyone wishing to speak has done so and discussion among the board has concluded, the public hearing will be closed. First item on the agenda is CBPA 24-0181 at 3319 Yarding Way, Miss Emily.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Emily Grogine, Watershed Planner, presenting CBPA 24-0181. Mr. Randy McReynolds of Kibor Homes has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Paul J. and Ms. Catherine A. Grace, trustee, for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of 2 retaining walls located at 3319 Yarding Way within the Stonehouse subdivision in the Ware Creek watershed. You can see the subject parcel outlined here in blue, along with that Ware Creek watershed boundary in yellow with a black line kind of covering it, just indicating the outline of the limits of James City County. The lot size of this property is 0.59 acres, of which 48% is located within the RPA. The applicants are proposing to construct 2 retaining walls. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 1,905 square feet of administrative impacts and 228 square feet of legislative impacts, for a total of 2,133 square feet of impacts to the RPA buffer. Total required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 5 planting units, or 5 canopy trees, 10 understory trees, and 15 shrubs. The applicants have submitted a mitigation plan equaling 5 planting units with an additional understory and shrub, therefore exceeding the county's mitigation requirements. Looking at some recent aerial photography, we have the subject parcel outlined in blue here, and I'd just like to preface this by saying the orientation of the GIS is different from that of the site plan, so we're going to be rotating it a little bit counterclockwise here. Here's the existing topography, and then the current RPA buffer on the property, and then kind of what I was saying about orienting ourselves. This is the proposed site plan. The building setback is outlined in this dark blue here. You can see the limits of the wetlands here in green, along with the proposed mitigation plantings. And then you have the landward 50 RPA buffer here, along with the 50 seaward. The portions of the retaining wall that are in the landward 50 are in purple here, with the portions that impact the seaward 50 buffer in orange. And then just moving in a bit closer to give you a better look at that, this little buffer here is just kind of showing the proposed limits of disturbance. And then the proposed single-family home here, it's grayed out. That is under administrative approval by staff. Some current site photos, kind of going off this corner of the property line, kind of where those retaining walls start here. We're going to go right. So it's going to extend from about here, kind of all the way out to here. And then just to look back up towards the front of the lot to give you an idea of the topography, since there are a couple steep slopes. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of 2 retaining walls. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of 2 retaining walls is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions outlined in front of you. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be major for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicants must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The applicants must submit a surety of $3,750 to guarantee in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plan equaling 5 canopy trees, 11 understory trees, and 16 shrubs. The applicants must record an affidavit in the Williamsburg-James City County Courthouse prior to the issuance of the building permit. A 6-foot chain link fence must be installed along the limits of disturbance that run along the wetland system prior to the start of construction. This exception request approval will become null and void if construction is not begun by February 12th, 2026, and written requests for an extension to an exception must be submitted to the SRP division no later than January 1st, 2026, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them at this time.
Questions for Emily? Would you be kind enough to show the site plan one more time, just to orient us? And back one more just to orient us to the building setbacks and so forth. It looks like they've moved that right corner of the house as far forward as they can to. All right.
Or any erosion on the property now?
I didn't see any, but based on the existing topography, you can faintly make it out on the site plan here with it up on the screen. That little grayed out bit here and there just shows steep slopes. Kind of going back to some of the site photos, you can see how steep it gets and kind of moving down and then looking back up, it's very hilly, so to speak. But I did not note any erosion when I was out there.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? With that, I will open the public hearing. Would anybody care to address the board on this matter? Takers. Looks like the matter is before us for discussion. I'll leave the public hearing open. in the event somebody wishes to speak. Thoughts or comments?
There's no existing erosion, so I assume the retaining walls are there to serve some other purpose, like maybe making better utilization of the property. Constructed properly should create.
You know, I do know that this is a hilly terrain, and we've seen these projects in other areas of the county where after construction, they end up with sheet erosion because of the increased impervious surface. I kind of view these as preventative in nature as opposed to addressing an existing erosion problem. I have no more comments. I'll ask again, any other comments from the audience? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing. The matter is before the board.
Mr. Chair, I agree with the comments that were made by the board members, and I would move to make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception request for Chesapeake Bay Board, case number CBPA-24-0181 at 3319 Yarding Way.
Mr. Wilson?
Motion is to adopt. Mr. Woolsey,
Aye.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Mr. May,
Yes.
Ms. Bowie,
Yes.
Mr. Roadley.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is CBPA 24-0067 at 131 Brookhaven Drive.
Chair, Emily Grogine, Watershed Planner, presenting CBPA 24-0067 at 131 Brookhaven Drive. Ms. Jennifer Bliss of Marquee Homes Incorporated has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Marquee Homes Incorporated for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a single-family dwelling with an attached deck located at 131 Brookhaven Drive within the Brookhaven subdivision and the Mill Creek watershed. You can see the subject parcel outlined in blue here, and then again we have the Mill Creek watershed boundary outlined in yellow here. The parcel was platted in 1972 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Therefore, the impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA buffer are considered administratively and outside the jurisdiction of the Chesapeake Bay Board. The total lot size of this property is 0.46 acres, of which 98% is located within the RPA. The applicant is proposing to construct a single-family dwelling with an attached deck. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 1,409 square feet of administrative impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA and 1,753 square feet of legislative impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA, for a total of 3,162 square feet of impacts to the RPA overall. Total required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 8 planting units, or 8 canopy trees, 16 understory trees, and 24 shrubs. The applicant has submitted a mitigation plan equaling 8 canopy trees, 16 understory trees, and 33 shrubs. This exceeds the county's mitigation requirements. So here we have aerial photography, and again, orientation with GIS versus the site plan is a little different. So we're gonna have to turn this 180. This is the front of the lot here, along with the existing topography per GIS and the resource protection area. As you can see, again, the majority of the lot, with the exception of this little bit here, is within the RPA. And then here we have the proposed site plan. The grayed out portion here is the administrative impacts to the landward 50, with the legislatively approved impacts to the seaward 50 in orange. We have the limits of the wetlands here. As you can see, the limits of disturbance run alongside here, so a condition of approval will be a 6-foot chain link fence. We have the buffers here along with the front building setback. And then same thing as before, but with the proposed mitigation. As you can see, all the replantings are to occur within that RPA buffer. Some recent site photos. If you look here on the site plan, there's an existing structure. That would be this to your left here. So good way to gauge kind of where we're at in terms of that seaward 50-foot RPA buffer beginning. So right about here is where that proposed single-family home and deck will be going in. Kind of moving forward a bit to see it a bit better in this area here, and the limits of disturbance. And then just going a little bit closer to show the extent of where that deck and single-family home will be placed. And then just looking back up towards the front of the lot to show you the topography of the site currently. Slopes to the rear a bit, but nothing too significant. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a single-family dwelling with an attached deck. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a single-family dwelling with an attached deck within the seaward 50-foot RPA cannot be approved administratively. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions outlined before you. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be major for the total proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The applicant must submit a surety of $5,250 and a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plan equaling 8 canopy trees, 16 understory trees, and 33 shrubs. The applicant must record an affidavit in the Williamsburg-James City County Courthouse prior to the issuance of the building permit. A 6-foot chain link fence must be installed along the limits of disturbance that run along the wetland system prior to the start of construction. And this exception request approval will become null and void if construction has not begun by February 12, 2026, and written requests for an extension to an exception must be submitted to the SRP division no later than January 1st, 2026, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them at this time.
Any questions for Emily?
So one question. So for the, I know we're familiar with like Ford's Colony, we do a lot of these, and the minimum square footage necessary, or the minimum square footage requirement for like a house in that neighborhood. Does the Brookhaven have a minimum square foot requirement in the neighborhood that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, so I will defer that to the applicant.
Any other questions? Thank you, Emily. With that, we will open the public hearing. Would anybody care to address the board on this case? This is unusual. Hearing none, I'll pull the matter back and leave the public hearing open for discussion.
I think, Mr. Chair, I would be curious to know if there was a minimum square footage requirement for, consistency of approach as we're, looking at these. This is certainly one that's in a, there's nowhere else to put it on the lot. It's in 98% RPA, but, and it seems to be a reasonable size house for the lot and compared to the house next to it, but I don't know if there are minimum requirements.
I concur. It does appear to be a reasonable size. I also noted the slopes on the lot are quite a bit more gradual than on some of the properties that we've reviewed. And I viewed the mitigation plantings to help mitigate some of that sheet flow that may present itself.
And the home is as far as, forward as they can get it in this situation.
Yeah, I agree. The garage is right up against the front setback, so.
I will call again. Does anybody wish to address the board on this matter? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing. The matter is before the board. I have a recommendation.
Make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception request for Chesapeake Bay Board case number CBPA 24-0067 at 131 Brook.
Mr. Wilson.
Motion is to adopt. Mr. Woolsey,
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Mr. May,
Yes.
Ms. Bowie,
Yes.
Mr. Roadley.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Next item on the agenda is CBPA 24-0069 at 108 Colonel Philip Johnson.
Hi again, Emily Grogine, Watershed Planner, presenting CBPA 24-0069 at 108 Colonel Philip Johnson. Ms. Jennifer Bliss of Marquee Homes Incorporated has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Bruce B. and Ms. Robin Phillips for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a single-family dwelling located at 108 Colonel Philip Johnson within the King Mill subdivision and the College Creek watershed. You can see here, as usual, subject parcels in blue with the watershed boundary outlined in yellow here. The total lot size of this property is 0.55 acres, of which 95% is located within the RPA. The applicants are proposing to construct a single-family dwelling. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 3,307 square feet of administrative impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA, 728 square feet of legislative impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA, for a total of 4,035 square feet of impacts to the RPA. The parcel was platted in 1978 prior to the adoption of the Ches Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Therefore, the impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA buffer are considered administratively and outside the jurisdiction of the Chesapeake Bay Board. We have aerial photography in front of you here of the lot. This is the front of the lot, rear of the lot, along with the existing topography and RPA buffer, as well as the FEMA floodplain, which is down here, closer to the water. This is the proposed site plan with the legislative Seaward 50 impacts highlighted in orange. As you can see, based on the existing topography, still fairly far from the wetlands due to the slope. We have the limits of disturbance here outlined in this little black buffer, along with the building setbacks in blue. Just kind of going off that same plan, but with mitigation proposed. As you can see, it's all proposed to be replanted within that RPA buffer. And then some site photos kind of showing you, again, that slope I was referring to with the existing topography. On the left side of the lot here, kind of where that 50-foot seaward impacts are to begin. And then moving left, again, just kind of showing the existing topography and proposed location on the lot. Just moving a little bit further to that slope here, you can see where it kind of begins to drop. And then just looking back to the left there to show the extent of where that proposed dwelling will be. And then just looking back up towards the front of the lot, you can see that where it's being proposed is still relatively flat for where it's at on the lot. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a single-family dwelling. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a single-family dwelling within the seaward 50-foot RPA cannot be approved administratively. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions outlined in front of you. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be major for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. Applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The applicant must submit a surety of $5,500 in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plan equaling 10 canopy trees, 21 understory trees, and 42 shrubs. The applicant must provide written approval from the Kings Mill Community Services Association for the dwelling as situated, crossing the building setback line prior to building permit issuance. The applicants must record an affidavit in the Williamsburg-James City County Courthouse prior to the issuance of the building permit. And this exception request approval will become null and void if construction is not begun by February 12th, 2026. And written request for an extension to an exception must be made to the SRP division no later than January 1st, 2026, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them at this time.
Questions for Emily?
I had one question, but she answered it in her permit conditions with the building setback. Thank you, Emily.
Welcome.
Emily, I have a question. I feel like I know the answer to this, but if you could go back to the site plan. I noticed that the finished floor for the building, maybe the number seems to be a mistake. It doesn't. I don't think that it's going to be 30 feet off the ground, but the finished floor was listed as 58, 57, with the rest of the ground around it being 25. Guessing that, just wanted to kind of clarify that that's not the case. So
I'm going to defer that to the applicant.
yeah, okay.
Any other questions for Emily? Thank you, Emily. With that, we'll open the public hearing. Would anybody care to address the board on this matter? This is a strange evening. With that, I'll pull it back to the board for discussion.
Error again, the 26 feet versus something?
Finished floor of the garage versus the first floor.
Yeah, the first floor of the house is listed at 58, 57. I'm
Nice.
guessing it's supposed to be 28, 57, but it would, yeah, that would make it,
A lot of crawl space.
yeah, a lot of crawl space, exactly. To me, pushing the building forward into the setback that they are needing to get waiver from, it looks like it places the house on a flatter area, which would help reduce erosion into the RPA buffer and limits.
I'm assuming, Mr. Chair, if we approve this, that is with the understanding that the permit condition is that the Kings Mill Association allows that encroachment, is my understanding.
Know if Kings Mill has minimum square footage requirements?
I do not. Emily, who is the agent for the applicant? Do they have an agent?
It's Jennifer Bliss of Marquee Homes, who has filed the application. And then Donald Davis is the designer of the plan.
I'm a little concerned moving forward with some of the questions that have been presented, but it is not within our purview to defer it. It is the applicant's purview. That leaves us in a bit of a quandary.
Mr. Chair, it does appear though is that the bulk of that is an administrative approval that's already been done. We're just looking at
Correct.
that orange area there, and not, if there was minimum square footage requirements, I'm assuming the house could potentially, if it was made smaller, could be moved to the right to put it in a better place potentially out of the RPA, but without knowing what that minimum square footage requirement is, or even if it exists, makes it difficult to make a decision on that.
Mr. Chair, Mike Wilson here, Section Chief. In consultation with the county attorney's office, you could leave the public hearing open until the March board meeting. We will be having a meeting next month, and staff will get with the applicants to see if they would come and answer the board's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Appreciate that option. If we pursue that option and leave the public hearing open, we simply move on to the next case. So I'll put it to the board. Do you wish to vote it up or down this evening, or move to the next case? I think with the questions posed, we would like to move on to the next case and leave this open for another month.
Would agree.
With that, I will move on to the next item on the agenda and leave this public hearing open for another month so that staff may confer with the applicant. Next item on the agenda is CBPA 24-0178 at 112 Sugarbush.
Chair, members of the board, Emily Grogine, Watershed Planner, presenting CBPA 24-0178 for 112 Sugar Bush. Mr. Corey Bell of Williams Landscape and Design Incorporated has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Paul Koskek and Ms. Karen Savage for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the installation of a patio and walkway located at 112 Sugar Bush within the Fords Colony subdivision in the Powhatan Creek watershed. The parcel was platted in 1997 after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. The RPA affected this lot with the 2004 revisions to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area. The total lot size of this property is 1.18 acres, of which 100% is located within the RPA. The applicants are proposing to install a patio and walkway. Here we have that subject parcel outlined in blue, along with the Powhatan Creek watershed boundary in yellow. A previous Chesapeake Bay exception under CBPA 23-0167 was approved for this existing single-family dwelling. The current case was heard by the board at the previous meeting and was deferred by the applicant to the next hearing date to better address concerns over the changed location of one of the proposed infiltration trenches. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 194 square feet of impervious impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA buffer. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals half a planting unit or 6 shrubs. The applicants have submitted a mitigation plan equaling 7 canopy trees, 13 understory trees, and 113 shrubs, thus satisfying the county's mitigation requirements for CBPA 23-0167 and this current proposal. Any mitigation surety as a condition of approval will only pertain to the additional half a planting unit or 6 shrubs that is required for this case. Additionally, the applicants have provided revised calculations for the 2 proposed stormwater BMPs to manage drainage on the lot. Prior to the issuance of a final certificate of occupancy, the applicants must submit a letter of installation from a qualified professional to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. No surveyed as-built drawings are required, but this letter must verify compliance with all approved construction plans for stormwater BMP facilities. Staff also requests that an affidavit be recorded in the Williamsburg-James City County Courthouse due to the environmental sensitivity of the lot. So we have the current aerial image of the lot, along with topography, resource protection area, and this was the previously approved site plan for the construction of the actual single-family residence. As you can see, that one BMP that was proposed has been moved here, which is before the board again this evening. This is a revised site plan from Mr. Grog, and this is the Williams plan that they intend to keep as their mitigation plan, along with those updated BMP cross-sections and specs. And then same site photos that were presented to you last month. This walkway is going to come off the staircase here and kind of go around to the left here. If we move to the other side of it, again, wrapping from the staircase out this way, coming out again here and ending right about here. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the installation of a patio and walkway. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a patio and walkway are considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions outlined before you. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. Applicants must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. Applicants must submit a surety of $500 in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation planting of 1/2 unit or 6 shrubs. An affidavit must be recorded in the Williamsburg-James City County Courthouse prior to the release of surety. The applicants must submit a letter of installation from a qualified professional to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division prior to the issuance of a final certificate of occupancy. This letter must verify compliance with all approved construction plans for stormwater BMP facilities, and no surveyed as-built drawings are required. The exception request approval will become null and void if construction is not begun by February 12th, 2026, and written requests for an extension to an exception must be submitted to the SRP Division no later than January 1st, 2026, or 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them at this time.
Questions for Emily? Thank you very much. Mr. Grog, finally, thank you.
I feel like you guys get off too easy.
Back to normalcy.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Chase Grogg with Land Tech Resources, 205 Bullifonts Boulevard, Suite E, Williamsburg, Virginia.
Let me make sure I open the public hearing.
Left over from last month.
Oh, from last month. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Emily, for your presentation. Since last month's meeting, I was brought on to revise our previously approved plan to reflect the new patio and proposed infiltration trench changes. The first change we made was to resize the rear infiltration trench to handle the additional impervious from the proposed walk and patio not previously approved. Due to the very small increase in impervious cover on the lot, the trench only needed to be elongated by a foot. As a reminder, the trench itself is 3 feet wide by 3 feet deep and filled with number 3 stone. The second change was to relocate the trench previously along the side of the house to more in front of the yard. To evaluate the feasibility of this request, we had one of our survey crews perform an under-construction topographic survey of the area. The results of that survey showed that to the right of the house was not cleared as much as previously approved. The original plot plan had roughly 20 feet of clearing, while current site conditions are closer to 10 feet off of the house. The grading along the front steps and walk did not include as much fill dirt as was originally shown on the approved plan as well. This shifted the previously proposed low point next to the house to the now proposed location. To ensure our revisions were acceptable to the neighbor, I had a site meeting with the owner of Lot 12, Mr. Detweiler, last Friday, as well as a meeting with Mr. Detweiler and Ford's Colony staff yesterday afternoon. We discussed how the water was going to leave our site and flow through the natural draw that has existed between the two properties prior to the Ford's Colony development. In addition, we discussed how over 100 acres of land drains through the rear of his lot and that our options were very limited. After the Friday meeting, I made a couple other minor changes to our development plan and coordinated with Williams Landscaping to update our plan to include dimensions and inspection requirements for the installed trenches. Aaron Williams, the owner of Williams Landscape and Design, is here with me tonight and is aware of the neighbors' concerns as well as the installation requirements to make sure all parties are satisfied post-construction. As of 2 p.m. today, staff received an email from Mr. Detweiler stating a no comment in response to our final plans. He goes on to say, my subject issue comments submitted at the January 9th, 2025 Chesapeake Bay Board regarding the infiltration trench discrepancies between the landscape plan and plot plan have been discussed and resolved in these respective updated plans. Emily has that email to read for you as well after my comments. This plan is pretty much the same as what Emily presented to you. You'll see that this trench was reflected. It was kind of graphically drawn incorrectly before. It was closer to 31 when it's going to be 41 feet long. There is going to be a berm that captures, so lot 16, basically their entire front yard drains through a draw that comes down here and goes out to the back. In the back here is more of a main channel that accepts that is closer to where the 100 acres comes from. There's a bunch of BMPs kind of from Centerville, Long Hill Road, southeast. This is the main draw that takes the 7-Eleven and a lot of that development up there. So it comes through this back area. So what we talked about with Mr. Detweiler is that existing all this drainage kind of comes along this property line and then through and past. And by installing this berm here, we're taking a lot of lot 16, bringing it around to our infiltration. What doesn't infiltrate would go over the berm and then kind of stay on this western portion from having walked the property. And you can see in the existing contours, it's not going to shoot kind of straight across and go to his house. It's going to stay on this side and then go to the back. And then again on the back here, this will all be directed. These infiltration trenches, as kind of a reminder back to the previous approval, were really designed to capture the impervious cover on the lot. So the main goal on these is that the roof gutters will be tied directly into them. And so though there's some sheet flow over here that will kind of go through this natural area, it was never really the goal to capture this grass area. It was more to capture, we have this T1 and a T2 for the back drainage area that are really how these were designed. And then again, kind of the overall design, stone in the ground. So there's catch basins on top, water goes into the stone, percolates into the ground during a big storm, you know, would go over the top. But main goal is to get that infiltration into the stone basin, which is why in this particular, in other bioretentions we design, you would want the water to sheet flow on the top, but it's okay here for us to connect it underground since we're trying to infiltrate it as is. The final Williams Landscaping Plan, another concern of Mr. Detweiler's was to make sure that this was going to be grass behind the infiltration trenches to make sure as it rains it doesn't wash mulch berm away. So berm will be mulch, grass swales, mulch berm, but behind the infiltration, that'll be grass. Again, directing the water, away from his lot. I have two more slides, just since I referenced it. This is a drainage map from the development actually right behind us, just kind of pointing out here where I pulled the 100 acres from. It's an older drainage map, so a lot of this has been developed more, but just kind of giving you a rough idea. Our property is located right in here. This is kind of the draw that's there. So Mr. Detweiler's property is right here. So he's got a significant flow behind him. So only so much we can really do, and we try and do our best to protect neighboring properties, but kind of going back to one of our conversations with Forts Colony. So again, Mr. Detweiler's lot is over here, kind of what the red arrow is pointing to. Our lot is here. So you'll see that there was kind of a ridge through all of these lots and a swale that came down through here. I pointed out to Mr. Detweiler, because one of his concerns in the Forts Colony requirements is that drainage is done per the original development plans. And you'll see here, over by lot 19 and 20, they had drainage easements. These pretty much had straight cross lot situations. So they added drainage easements and added swales to direct that water away. But here they, for whatever reason, probably because there wasn't much they could do, they left these draws there, which is why we kind of flowed the way we are. Again, happy to answer any questions you may have. But last month spent a lot of time trying to make the neighbor happy while taking care of that additional impervious in the back, which was kind of why we were originally here, with a slight shift in the previously approved infiltration trench.
Any questions for Mr. Grog?
No, appreciate your thorough explanation of all the variables. Just out of curiosity, how far does that berm extend past the house, if at all?
The Williams landscaping plan really shows it the best.
There.
So we are trying to do our best, catch anything coming off these stairs, do our best to catch this kind of first area. But again, the overall thought is that there'll be a downspout here that would be directed here. So, pretty much capturing this entire front yard. And that was something Mr. Detweiler and I talked about. So it's kind of just this area along the edge here that isn't captured into one of those.
Any other questions for Mr. Grog? Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Anyone else care to address the board? Ms. Emily?
I just want to confirm what Mr. Grog stated about the receipt of an email from Mr. Detweiler addressing any outstanding issues he may have had with previous plans. Staff is in receipt of that email and is part of the official record.
Thank you. With that, I will bring the matter back to the board for discussion.
Chair, I think Mr. Groggs has certainly mitigated those concerns to a reasonable degree, and certainly has also got the approval of the neighbor as well. So I would be in support of this proposal.
Any other comments? With that, I'll close the public hearing. The matter is before the board.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the exception request for case number CVPA 24-0178 at 112 Sugar Bush.
Mr. Wilson?
Motion is to approve. Mr. Woolsey,
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Mr. May,
Yes.
Ms. Bowie,
Yes.
Mr. Roadley.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
And that appears to end the cases on tonight's agenda. Board considerations, Mr. Wilson, the 2025 calendar modification.
Yeah, since this board adopted their 2025 calendar, there was a slight conflict with the November meeting, and we have to shift it back one day from Wednesday to Thursday to account for the Board of Supervisors. Just need an official blessing on that, and we'll make
All
it
in
happen.
favor of the revised calendar signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I see no matters of special privilege. We have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved. We are adjourned.